Good morning, everyone, and welcome to AMUX. If this is your first time here, welcome. We do this every first of the month or every first Wednesday of the month to discuss all things UX and design. We usually have a speaker, and after the speaker, is done speaking, we usually follow it up with a Q&A round at the end. So today we have with us Dan Klyn. He's the founder of the Understanding Group, which is a group of information architects that help clients structure and organize information in a way that yields delight and conversion. He's also a professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where he teaches information architecture, where he usually approaches designing digital spaces as one would design physical spaces. And I've had the pleasure of taking his class back in 2015. Apart from that, he is also co-founder of World Information Architecture Day, past president of the Information Architecture Institute, and is a founding member of the teaching faculty at Building Beauty. Dan, thanks so much for being here, and I don't want to take up any more time, so take it away.
Thank you. Um, well, I feel so distant from you, and yet here we are in my basement and in Michael's spare bedroom and in Cliff's office. I so would like to be there with you in person, but realize that that's not practical right now. So we're gonna have to make this work. Before we get started, I should probably share my screen. Yes. So before we get started, if you would like to follow along, there is a little booklet that you can download. And this modality of working out an idea, you all are the first people that I'll be talking about this with. I hope it isn't the last group of people that I'll talk about this with. One of the ways to work on an idea that I've found to be really helpful, I learned this from Abby Covert, is to make a paper thing out of it as soon as possible. And so that is the way that I've worked on this and tested this so far is as a booklet. I have no idea if this works as a presentation at 9 o'clock in the morning over Zoom. So the booklet is meant to help you see architecture. And that is not always a straightforward proposition. I agree with this quote that I found from the French filmmaker here, whose name I won't slaughter, but she worked in film, she worked as a playwright, she worked as a poet, and all of those different ways of making help you develop uh, this art of seeing. And so I hope this booklet and the discussion that we can have after I walk you through it will help develop this art of seeing and to know where to look. It seems so dumb, but I think that a lot of the challenge of working on complex systems is knowing where to look and how to look at them. So that's what this is about today, and so glad that you're here to do this with me. A lot of the ways of seeing that I've developed over the years have happened in the context of information architecture consulting. Uh, I co-founded a company called the Understanding Group that does only that information architecture focused work. So that's one set of influences that helped shape this the stuff I'm going to take you through today. And then yeah, the other set of influences is being in a room usually, although last term was the first time we did it all remote, but typically I'm in a room with 30 or 40 or 50 University of Michigan School of Information students. And the ability to take ideas that are partially worked out, which is what this is today, and to work on it with students is such a wonderful gift. So a lot of the things that I've learned, ways of seeing that I've developed, have been through the interaction with, collaboration with, and cooperation with my students at the University of Michigan. So models, I have a model here today, basic, And if you've heard of me, perhaps it's as the developer of a previous model for describing information architecture. If you've read How to Make Sense of Any Mess or Andrew Hinton's book, Understanding in Context, some other folks in the field of information architecture have found this model helpful. The thing that I love the most is when I do a search for this on Google, seeing 300 different ways that people have taken this model, visualized it for themselves using different typography, different kinds of visual ways of explaining information architecture. So I did that about 10 years ago, and so now I'm going to do this, a new model. And where the previous model for explaining information architecture, when Peter Morville issued a challenge to the community of practice to come up with better ways to explain information architecture, that's where that came from. Uh, the kind of information architecture work that I did and that I knew the most about had a lot to do with taxonomies. It had a lot to do with the sense-making work of arranging concepts and labels and words into something that is understandable and usable, usually websites. And when we're doing it right in that way, the feeling is, oh, it's so clear, it's so conceptually crisp, those taxonomic structures. That was the mode that I was focused on. And in the intervening years, my focus has been more on the other side of the equation. Both of these things are always happening in information architecture, sense making and place making. And this other side of the equation, when it's good, I noticed that it's a different kind of it's a feeling. It's something uh, about how I'm oriented. Proprioception in my body somehow is involved in information architecture or any complex system that I engage with that has this goodness that I'm after, and trying to learn about that feeling based way of sensing places, and incorporating that into information architecture work. I'm certainly not the first to observe, hopefully won't be the last, that buildings are something that we read. I came up with a couple of little cartoons here based on an article by Bott in 2014, who was observing that the same basic uh, approach to a building, depending on the arrangement or the situatedness of the openings on the front of the building, we read that as uh, we understand it, and we intuit, we feel which of the approaches in a building are working or not without necessarily having to do a whole lot of cogitating about it. Sometimes it just starts to feel right before we even have a chance to think about it. For example, with this little cartoon here, as soon as I make a little move like this to uh, in looking at what these buildings might be for, and which of those three options might be a more appropriate, might be a good way to approach the situation that we're trying to address through the architecture. There's this feeling, yep, that would be the one that is the most Christian church-like of those three examples. So that uh, working as an information architect, being really interested in the architecture part, wanting to have a relationship with the work that I do on interfaces and complex systems, uh, that's more like what architects do. All of that led me to the work of Richard Saul Wurman, who I'm working with in a fairly constant way right now, working on his biography. My interest, what led me to him, was doing the cursory thing that one does when you become interested in something, becoming interested in information architecture, sort of Googling it and finding out that this guy was doing something called that in 1975 or even earlier. So wanting to understand the architecture part of information architecture, and then wanting to learn from this guy about how it is that the spatial aspect of this kind of design of complex systems. This is a picture of Richard as a 36-year-old working with the president of the Industrial Valley Bank, working through a model, a really dumb cardboard model of what the bank might be like. And in Philly in the mid 70s, or the early 70s is when this was taken, Werman's firm was doing both the physical design of the space to make that be good, to have that feeling of, yes, this is a good place to do my banking. But then at the same time, also working on the problem of, well, there's 78 people on the floor upstairs from the lobby. How do we arrange all of those people and all of that equipment and all of that furniture in order to make it structurally have that, yeah, this feels right, as well as that sense making, orderly conceptual clarity, that crispness of concept that we want. He was working in both of those realms as far back into his career as I was able to go. So that's where all this is coming from, is a fascination with things that are spatial and the way that spatiality changes the way that we understand things. Um, as some of you know, Mr. Werman came up with a I don't know if it's a theory, it's an approach to information that is based on this axiom at the top of the slide here that says the creative organization of information creates new information. Uh, the spatializing of anything, the decisions about where people sit, the adjacencies, the dynamics of what happens when you arrange people and concepts and things in order to accomplish complex outcomes and to solve wicked problems. Uh, all of that has a really important aspect of arrangement to it. And if you knew of Richard Saul Werman prior to me talking about him this morning, it could be because he invented the TED conference. But as UX designers, you may also know about Latch, this idea that there are 5 basic ways to organize information: location, alphabet, time, category, hierarchy, works into an acronym. Uh, it occurs to me, and I'm, again, not the first one to make these observations, that Latch is a spatializing of information. That is one of the reasons why it is so helpful, is it gives you 5 different situatednesses of the things that you want to make sense of, that you need to be accountable for as a UX designer, using space as a way of enhancing meaning, as a way of force multiplying the stuff that you really want to accomplish. So I've taken that acronym approach with what I've got for you today with BASIC. The entities here, all of these are spatial strategies that I have mostly used in just in my own work so far, and in taking people on architecture walks in the built environment at conferences and things. And so my purpose today is to reveal some of the thinking behind these elements, to explain them first with some buildings, and then to show you some things from the world of digital, from other kinds of complex systems. One of the conceits underneath all of this, of course, is that the architectures of complex systems have a commonality to them, and that the strategies for looking at them, thinking about them, ultimately intervening in them to develop solutions, that it's all architecture. Information architecture, software architecture, physical architecture, strategic architecture, that it's all the architecture of complex systems is the conceit here. So I'll take you through this first with some cartoons of buildings, and then some examples from digital, and then hopefully there will be plenty of time, at least 15 minutes or so, for us to talk about this. Okay. And again, go to the website, get the booklet. Here we go. So the first element, if if you didn't use any of the other elements, this one would get you pretty far. Um, Considering boundaries, the again, gaze direction. Where should I be looking at the complex system, product, service, building, whatever, in order to see where the architecture stuff is, the things that are most relevant to the architecture? uh, Looking at, considering, asking questions about boundaries is a terrific way to start getting into that. And prime example of this, and all these examples of buildings are places that I've been to. The first one here is the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe. And in thinking about the boundary element, and if you were to visit this place, and let's say the docents were not there, somehow you had access to this. You wanted to use this principle of boundary to make sure that you were looking at, understanding, asking the really potent questions. Boundary gets you a long way here. Starting with the site, being next to the Fox River in Plano, Illinois. The client was a physician who had this piece of property. The architect considered many questions of boundary in developing this. One of the most basic boundaries is the floodplain. The Plano River had, at the time that this was built, what does the booklet say? Around 1951, it says, there was 100-year flood line, which was established by the local historians. And so the architects who, and designers and engineers who put this there considered that boundary as the place where the water would come up to in a very quite extreme condition. And then they proceeded forward from there. So, well, when you roll up on this thing, the angle that I photographed it from here makes it hard to appreciate that this thing is up on stilts and is 5.5 feet above the ground at the lowest point or so, lowest point of the land underneath this thing. Why? Why does it show up the way that it does? What are the things that it has to reckon with in its environment? That's one of the chief challenges, was the boundary of water and the desire for the client to enjoy proximity to water, as humans always do. So uh, boundary, and there's a couple of questions here in the booklet for each of the elements. Who or what is transformed by the boundary? Uh, this gets into the cultural aspect as much as the physical architectonic aspect. Mrs. Farnsworth was transformed by the boundary of the privacy of cladding of a house not being part of this design, the attention that this drew, and the celebrity that Ms. Farnsworth rather enjoyed, uh, from the elimination of the boundary, the propriety of having a opaque enclosure to hide all of the stuff that we do. This was uh, out in the country, and when it was built, there wasn't a lot around here for this to be so scandalous to have a glass house. But again, uh, approach these questions really simply and straightforward. In the dumbest sense, who was transformed? The client was transformed by the the boundary work of this building. And I've reduced these to make them a little easier to consider. Another set of boundaries here, of course, is what are the exceptions to the boundary is the question. The way that this building works is there are 3 bays that are glassed in, and then a 4th bay that is not glassed in that operates as a porch. It's got a roof over it, but it's open. Uh, the exception to the boundary creates a pleasant place to sit. So that's a couple of the ways that boundary works in the story of the Farnsworth house. The next element is association, meanings ascribed to shape and material. And before we leave the Farnsworth house, um, four pillars. As the sort of the silhouette of this thing, I do not think that it is accidental. I've not read this, but I just think that this is true, having been to both of them. That there's another, probably the most famous residence in the United States by Thomas Jefferson, Monticello, has four pillars in the front of it as well. So associations, the association of what is an iconoclastic, classic, important work of American residential architecture, the association of the Farnsworth House to Monticello through the use of those four columns, let's say, perhaps. Excuse me. Back to the questions, though. Uh, does the system depend on or allude to another system? So asking questions of a complex system like this house, what is it alluding to, or what other meanings that are not here does this depend on? One of the primary associations that this house has is that it is not associated with Georgian architecture. In the 1770s in the United States, with a bunch of wealthy landowners and other kinds of rabble-rousers who rose up in revolution against the British, they were intent on showing up in a way that was not the British Empire. And so to repeat works of Georgian architecture, instead, what was happening here, the association that was most important to Jefferson was to be associated with two things are happening here, I believe. One is to be associated with the democratic ideals of Greece through the use of the dome and the use of the Doric order of the columns on the building. So we're not like the British Empire. We are like the democratic uh, state of Greece back in antiquity. And then also, of course, republican, not so much the imperial aspects of Rome, but the republican aspects of Rome are all part of the association that is want to be made here by Jefferson at Monticello. And other kinds of association. There is an association of material. The finer material is typically associated with finer ideas and finer ideals. It's pleasant for me as an American to find fairly modest materials here at Monticello. These are not marble columns, and it's just brick for the cladding. So being associated with the right things, uh, I find those to be acts of architecture, meaning making in architecture. What do we want to be associated with? The third element, situation. This is a funny word. Situatedness is more of the sensibility that I'm interested in than some of the other ways that this word means in culture. And again, this is a draft framework, and this word might be too loaded. We might have to abandon this word at some point. But by situatedness in space, what I'm thinking about is a building here in Hudsonville, Michigan, where I live. You've never heard of Hudsonville. That's okay. It's a small town in between Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan. And the tallest building that we have in this part of the world is 3 stories, maybe 4 at the most. And the story of this particular building, it was built by a company called Lamar Construction in 2006. They had a business that included a lot of office work, and they had a business that included a lot of heavy machinery and construction work. And they decided to situate these two functions of their business in 2 different, the architectural word is volumes. So a giant rectangle and a fatter, squatter rectangle. And to situate the people and the processes and everything that's happening in the business, to situate the office work up above the the stuff going on down below, which back to Monticello for a quick second, it's also going on here, the situatedness of the functions in space. Thomas Jefferson was not all that well traveled, but he did spend a lot of time in Italy, in the Veneto region, admiring the works of Andrea Palladio. And the Palladian idea of the main floor being up above the ground, and that underneath, and that up above part, the piano nobile, I believe it's called, that was the dignified level where the dignified things happened. And then below, the servants, or in the case of Thomas Jefferson, slaves, doing the unseen, necessary, hidden, stooped over hot down there in the basement. Um, so situating the labor from the enjoyment of the fruits of labor is something that's going on here in Monticello as well. Here with Lamar Construction, uh, crazy town. This is the largest cantilevered structure in the state of Michigan. And ultimately, Lamar Construction went out of business. Back to the questions on the sheet. How does the order of the system fit into the ordering of the ecosystem? So here's this weird building in Hudsonville. Here's the ecosystem of the world around it. Um, it turns out that you've never really seen a horizontal skyscraper of offices plopped and cantilevered over top of a giant machine shed, because economically it doesn't work. Uh, they 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 spent $7 or $8 million on this building, and then within a year of opening it, went out of business. So the choices that we make, how and what to situate, moving the parts of a business offering around, or the sections of a website around, um, because of reasons. And these folks had some peculiar reasons. Yeah, that's enough about Lamar Construction. Penultimately, in the basic model, we're almost there. Invariance. And again, funny word. Maybe this word is too weird. Maybe the framework will have to get a different acronym and we'll use a different word for this. But the important, as a designer and as somebody who wishes to see the architecture of a complex product or service, this is a indispensable element. And the question that it asks is, what are the constant forces? What is always happening in this environment? One of the things that Richard Saul Werman told me, that Lou Kahn, his teacher at Penn in architecture school and beloved mentor, one of the things that he admired Kahn for as an architect was the way that Kahn would look at what was happening on the site and find the what is invariant there, find what wants to happen in the ecosystem there, and then use the buildings to make it do more of that. So detecting what are the forces in the environment and then working together with them strategically. Uh, any architecture that is working in spite of the forces in the environment is doing a lot more work than it needs to do. Uh, this is a delightful structure that I took a picture of one time when I was visiting Seattle, walking up a really steep hill in a one of the microclimates, one of the micro things they have there. I forget what the word is, microbiome or something. But anyway, what is invariant here? What is always happening here are two things: the steepness of the pitch of this piece of land, and the microclimate here having, it's basically like a rainforest and a constant amount of rain. And for a visitor from Michigan, for me to if I were to draw you a house of how people live here, we have snow and rain and stuff like that, it would be I would draw a pitched roof. So to bump into in my travels an instance of the opposite, literally the opposite of how buildings work where I live, and seeing the way that this is a synergizing both with the elements and with the site. I thought this was a terrific example of invariance of rising to the constant forces that are always there. So whose authority prevails over the system? Uh, Weather, topography, what conditions persist in the milieu. I've been in Seattle when there's been like less than an inch of snow, and because of the steepness of the hill, it just the whole world shuts down. So there are interesting invariants when we look at the built environment, at the things that people did to respond to what was invariant in the environment. That is a site of potential architectural discovery, as far as I'm concerned. And then ultimately, and acting kind of as the opposite of the invariance. This is about what is the nature of change in a place? What are the variable forces in an environment? Some of you may know the name Yamasaki from as the architect of the World Trade Center in New York. Um, this is one of his works. He was a Michigan-based architect. This is a building he made in East Lansing, Michigan, for a uh, for a professional association. And again, sometimes when I look at buildings, when I read them, I come up with things that other reasonable people might not. So this is just me, but for a and having been involved in professional organizations myself, by statute in Michigan, nonprofit organizations have to have 4 officers, and those positions change based on elections or other kinds of forces in the organization. And so I think Yamasaki did a terrific job here of embodying the cyclical nature of a voluntary professional organization to enshrine these 4 officer positions, perhaps with a little different treatment. But ultimately, this building is all equal bays. I see these as the members of the association all sort of standing there together, shoulder to shoulder, to represent the interests of their group, with a that group of 4 there changing from time to time. So that's the story of cycles for this one building, but the more general set of questions that you can ask in order to see the architectural interventions that are meant to rise to deal with cycles. Some of those questions: what are the triggers for turning into the next cycle? In e-commerce and retail, Christmas being such a big thing. What are the signs of an impending cyclical change? When the Halloween decorations start coming down and the Christmas decorations start going up. So that is the final element there. And what I'm hoping is that whether you're walking around with this little booklet and looking at through the eyes of a librarian, let's say, and a complex system of information organization, or through the eyes of the architect there in the middle, buildings and spaces, and how do you change structure to support a better way of living, or the digital glasses that we all look through, that you can apply this in the work that you do in a number of different ways, wearing a couple of different pairs of these glasses at a time, let's say. And a couple of quick examples before we break for questions and objections. So this is, most of these are examples from my own work. This is a movie theater chain here in Michigan, Celebration Cinema, and thinking about boundaries and how important that was to the information architecture work we did with these folks. One of the things that we worked on with them was to expand their ability to sell products. They could sell a movie ticket, but with their ambition and what they needed to get done, they needed to change a boundary in their world and how they went to market, because they needed to be able to sell series. So not just a particular film, but we want to sell you a pass to a whole series, let's say. And what we found out was that the boundary in the data model and just sort of how their system was set up, there was a boundary that needed to be moved. Um, we discerned through the work that we did with the stakeholders and through examining their systems that when they were selling a movie ticket, really what they were selling was only and always a showtime. And so by changing the definitional boundary about what things are in their world, we changed their whole system so that what they would end up selling on the website is a ticket or a bundle of tickets, like for a series that may or may not yet have a showtime. This allowed them to then realize a business strategy of expanding into a in-person event venue where they have comedians and music. Um, and at the place, they have a place in downtown Grand Rapids called Studio Park, where there is a movie theater venue and this live venue. It gave them the flexibility to sell an event in their piazza, James Bond viewing party, to sell tickets to shows, including shows that didn't yet have a specific time, and the ability to sell movies, all by moving the boundary from one shape around one concept into a different shape around another concept in their information architecture and ultimately in how the website showed up. Association. Those of you who are on the older side of UX practice might remember the ways that whatever Amazon does or did was the thing that we either did or did not want to be associated with. And the saga, Luke Wroblewski has written about this. The saga of the tabs on Amazon, the permission giving when they went from 2 rows to 3 rows of tabs, or the permission removal when Amazon removed a drop-down select item from their menu. If we want to be associated with the leading edge or excellence in e-commerce, then we have to show up in a way that is like, or not like, depending on your business, what they do. Other kinds of associations that show up for us, iOS users might know this one. When you associate the spatial location of certain kinds of features or the visual presentation of feature A, when you encounter feature B, you're still associating the previous example, and you're going to end up either sleeping in or misoperating the timer or whatever you're going to do. So inverted L navigation, global navigation at the top, local navigation underneath. All of these are learned associations about the way that things show up in websites that deciders about these things change the way that they show up because they want to be associated with what people already know, let's say. Yeah. Situatedness. Starbucks has provided many fine examples of this element over the years. I've enjoyed watching them struggle with the merger or the acquisition of Teavana and the integration of tea into coffee world. They've finally navigated that fairly well. And now with their website, they have situated many things. I used to, I had been thinking that the microsite had died, but no, here it is. Starbucks has a game that you can play called Starland that doesn't show up anywhere in their navigation system. It's just a promotion on the homepage, and it is time limited, and next month it'll go away. And having to situate that in the navigation structures that they persistently offer, that they didn't want to mess with that, it looks like to me. So they decided to situate a whole experience digitally outside of the navigation system. Great. I hope they succeed with that. This did not render, so I'm not sure what this was supposed to be. Oh, it's yeah, it's an animation. I'm sorry. The situatedness on an iPhone of what is up or down. is confusing. We'll just skip that point. Penultimately, invariants. Some of the things that my company gets to work on are apps for cars. And again, if something can be counted on in the environment as always being there, you can then choose to shape products and service architectures, lean into that, and make some pretty neat stuff. This is a picture of the sort of democratization of the start of your car, the unlock lock function of your car, the open your trunk, things that vehicles have in common that are invariant in the physical object are now making it possible for iOS users, at least, who have multiple different kinds of cars, brands of cars, to operate their critical functionality from one app, which is pretty cool. And then another example of invariance that I participated in is wanting to go see a concert in another country and the time when the tickets go on sale. What was invariant here is that I could get up at 3 a.m. in order to get in the queue to be number 573 in the line to buy these tickets. So a ticketing system that works across time zones using the invariance of UTC as a sense-making tool that helped me immensely. And then lastly, examples of cycles. There are websites that have different functionality that is expressed at different times, depending on, like for a healthcare sign up, there's a certain time of year where there's lots of things to do here, and then other times of year where the functionality is withheld because of rules about the cycles of the way that these things work. And lastly, really ponderous example, if you were to try to leave Instagram or Facebook, where you or I might think of that as a final decision, they have implemented this in a way to present it as a cycle, that you can disable your account instead of deleting it. And you can disable your account once a week. Or in the case of Facebook, if you try to quit, they will schedule the actual time that deletion or whatever would happen 30 days out. There's no way for me to make this decision as something right now. They want to turn this into a cycle of reconsideration before I do something rash like leave their platform. So that's a quick stumble through some of the ways that I think about BASIC in terms of buildings, some examples from the world of digital, and in the about 13 minutes or so that we have left, I would love to hear your questions and objections. And then the URL here, the shortened URL, at the bottom of the page, you can download the booklet from there, but there's a little form that goes just to me. And I would love to get your feedback on this in order to make it better. Obviously, this was a 1.0, never said these things out loud to people before kind of thing. And I really want to make this better. So thank you for your attention. And I would love to take your questions and objections.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dan. We'll be taking questions now. So if you do have a question, please use the raise hand feature in the bottom panel, and I will unmute you so you can ask Dan your question directly. Let's see if anyone has questions.
Again, or objections.
Or objections.
I see one.
I see one. Oh, it's Michael.
It's me. I don't know if that's cheating.
Ringer, I believe is what we call that. Thank you.
I did just want to say, especially when you were talking about situations, I appreciated that you were bringing this framework out in a way where you're very open to the fact that it might need to change based on new information or how things are being processed. I think that typically there can be a lot of pressure to put something out that is set in stone, especially when it's a framework. Um, and I just really appreciated that you were honest about, how things might need to be different. I guess to add a question onto this, what are the challenges that you're seeing in each of these sort of areas where it might push some sort of change?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that gives me pause is to know how badly, once you find an acronym that kind of does some of the work, right? Because some of what I want to do here, and again, I'm happy to take your criticism, which is like whatever you feel, just tell me, and that'll help. Some of that will help me. But critique is even more valuable, right? And in order to do critique, you need to know what I was trying to do. And what I'm trying to do is basic, right? Like it's to say that if you don't know where to look to see the architecture, then it's not necessarily on you, or you're not a dummy for not seeing it. So 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 I tried to not fall too in love with the acronym, but I realized that it might have to go. So yeah, situatedness, I think of that as, oh my God, they situated a sideways skyscraper over top of a machine shed. What were they doing? And my desk, right? I resituate the stuff on my desk instead of doing my work. I resituate in order to tell myself that I'm going to do my work better because of a more optimal way of the things being arranged in my world. So yeah, I down here in my basement and with COVID, I've not been around people. I forgot how to do that. So yeah, I don't know if these work or not. And and another historical note, when Werman came up with latch, he didn't come up with latch. He came up with lack. It took somebody else saying, you know what, that's almost an acronym. And his willingness to then backronym into latch. So it was location, alphabet, time, continuum, and category. And those are 5 ways of organizing information. And somebody just noticing and saying, you know what, you're almost there. And again, thinking, well, latch, that's like the key to unlocking spatial. You kind of fall in love with an acronym, and that's dangerous. So yeah, I'm saying I'm open. When you give me a good challenge, I may suffer, but I'm saying I'm open.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Cool. Next we have a question from Havana. I'll allow you to unmute you, Havana.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Dan. Thank you so much for your talk. Could you explain the movie ticket site example again in regards to boundaries? I
Yeah.
didn't quite fully understand. And then my second question is, are there common mistakes that people make when trying to organize the architecture of digital products?
Ooh, that's a potent. The number two is very potent. The practical problem with the movie theater site
Mm-hmm.
was software ultimately requiring for anything that it was ticketing software,
Mm-hmm.
and the vendor they bought it from didn't imagine that the idea of ticket wouldn't include time. It was just baked into the data model, and the business had been operating in this way for years because it was their cash register system and their back end system. So and they it was unevenly distributed in the organization. That's one of the great values of working with an information architect, is for somebody to make a picture of you and then hold it up to you and then say, look, it's you. And then for you to have the opportunity to agree or disagree with that simplified, abstracted picture. And when we did, we're like, you guys don't sell movies, you sell time blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And for some
Okay.
folks, it was like, oh crap.
Got
So
it.
that's why we can't sell a pass to the summer indie LGBTQ film series.
Mhm.
That's why they have to call customer service, and we have to like give them they had vouchers that were not time based, so they had to like it was disordered. So they had a structure that they inherited from a software choice that worked just fine until some new marketing director is like, hey, let's sell tickets to a series. And that
Okay.
led to the, well, we're going to need a new back end and ultimately front end for the website. So then
Okay.
throwing on top of that, back to the, what is the common
Mm-hmm.
mistake that UXers make when they're tasked with organizing stuff? Um, there's a architecture firm called Dash Marshall that sells little lapel pins. Uh, and so they've called it the Saarinen maneuver. It's a little lapel pin to remind you of something that Eliel Saarinen said. He was the founder of Cranbrook, the art school here in Michigan. And he said, always design a thing in the next bigger context. So you design a
Mm.
chair in a room in a house in a, whatever the next order of magnitude is. Um, Especially, if you're a new UXer and you're told to do the navigation today, or to organize that part, there is a exactly what you were told way to do that, which is inside of where I think my scope is, do it inside of there. And the architectural move, so how do you see more like an architect, is to zoom back and say, yeah, I know I only have permission to work on this part, but this part is circumscribed by that, which is surrounded by a this. And so I'm gonna make some different choices because I know about the that and the this that are um, nested where I've been told to do my thing is nested in some other contexts. I think that's the back to space. If we could just spatialize our ways of thinking more and better, I think we would preempt a lot of the trouble we get into. The whole like, hey, we need 15% more products added to the menu system. Like, no, like you can't fit anymore in there. Um,
Okay.
it's like,
Yeah.
well, if I had done it chair in a room in a house in a village style, maybe I would have been able to see back to what's invariant and what's going to change. Maybe in my group, the number of products isn't invariant, and then the next group up, it's like, oh no, we're planning on we're adding knives to the
Okay.
forks. Yeah.
Yeah, and now how how do you do this when maybe you don't know what that bigger context is? Like there's
Being
some
nosy.
okay,
By being nosy.
I
And
get it.
and and by yeah, there's something about not back to boundaries. There's something about not honoring the boundary of what they say your job is. Um,
Mm,
and having the curiosity, um, being willing to have your hand slapped, to reach the point of like, you really don't need to know about that.
mhm.
Like, no, I really want to.
Yeah, actually, I have a really good example of this. Now, that makes so much more sense. It makes things a lot clearer. I worked on this turbofan engine diagnostics tool in aerospace. And at first, everyone was like, it basically just captures all the sensors that were in the engine, capturing fan speed, vibration, metal particles in the engine, like hundreds of data points. And everyone was thinking about it in terms of these data points. But then I started realizing the actual context is like, all these data points are captured in fractions of a second. So we're actually getting like these slices of time, like these millisecond snapshots of the engine. It's not the individual data points, it's what's happening at that exact millisecond.
And that was right there, right? Like that, it's seeing what everybody can see,
Mhm.
but hasn't yet really been seen.
Right. And so
Like,
that,
oh my God, you know that we've got these moments where we
yes.
could aggregate the sensors,
Mhm.
and those would be snapshots that would tell us something that is different than this millisecond by millisecond world. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Cool.
Sounds like your work is fun and dangerous.
Yeah.
Dan, I was wondering if you were open to sticking around for a couple of more minutes. It looks like we do have a lot of questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's not go to work. Let's just talk about weird stuff.
Yeah. Cool. I'm so sorry if I butchered your name, but I think the next question we have is from Alastair.
Oh, hooray. An old friend.
Hi, it's Alistair, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
What can I do for you, Alistair?
Hi, Dan. That was all good. Just as a question about the purpose of the booklet, is the booklet a reflection on the architectures we encounter, or a booklet for self-reflection on the way in which we encounter architectures? Because a lot of the questions could be, because you talk about sort of the way in which a person encounters perspectives, but of course, boundaries, but of course boundaries depend upon your perspective. And you talk about the way in which metaphors work, but of course that depends upon your historic and lived experience of metaphors. And you talk about variance and invariance and stuff like that, where it depends on where you are in space-time in terms of
Yeah.
your encounter. So how much is it about us critiquing the buildings that we encounter, or the architectures we encounter, or about critiquing our own embodied experiences?
I want to let that one work on me for a minute or two before I say anything. Wow. It back to for critique, what was I trying to accomplish? This whole thing came the backstory was that I went to the Farnsworth house with a friend, and we were looking at our photographs afterwards, and he's prone to self-deprecation and to not appreciating his own beauty and talent as much as I do. And in one of those moments, he was looking at the pictures that, like, we went to the same place, dude. Like, we went to the same place, and you saw things there. You're the camera eye, your choices as a photographer. He wanted me to tell him something about how I made those choices. And that's the backstory to getting to this. So back to the explicit purpose is to help people know where to look, to see the architectural event, to see the relevant architectural milieu. It strikes me that the detection of that and the way that I've phrased my questions, yeah, that's all happening in the person. So I think, yeah, it's about the how do I use my perception and a little bit of what I can discover about an environment to improve my vantage point into it or
Yes,
something.
something. Yeah. No,
Does that make
I just,
sense?
yeah. No, it was just sort of the way, because I come out of wayfinding rather than
Yep.
architecture, and it's mostly how does a person make the journey and stand in a place surrounded by information and
Yep.
make sense is that sort of is Andrew Hinton stuff, the embodiment of the experience of the encounter stuff. So
Yes.
that was why I was just sort of, because as I say, the tool works both ways.
Yes, and that's the Abby Covert and I are working on this problem of sense making and place making, the simultaneity of those, the as practitioners, depending on who we are and where we're working and how we're working, right? Like for you, Alistair, working in wayfinding, you probably are able to develop the place making side of that equation in lots of ways that one of your friends who's on a product team who's doing interaction design, let's say, they're having to make a lot of choices and be accountable for ideas, perhaps more in the sense making, conceptual crispness realm. And we need to be able to do both. And so, yeah, I think I have an opportunity to either clarify that this is about what's happening to you, person who's holding the booklet, or to maybe bifurcate it and have some questions that are more about the system as such. And maybe I could then strengthen the ones that are more about you, the person encountering and questioning.
Yeah.
It'll
Okay.
be a book that folds inside out, and it's got the me stuff on the inside and the we stuff on the outside, perhaps.
Yes. No, I did have a book once I did like that, which read both backwards and forwards from system to person and person to system. But yes. Anyway, that was my
Well,
question.
yeah, no, and Alistair, back to the thing, like, I want this to be basic, and that's why the acronym is important to me. And there's something about the physicality of, well, if this is about inside and outside, then the artifact needs to do that too.
Yes.
Lovely.
But, okay. Anyway, thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Cool. Next, we have a question from Daniel.
Oh, Mr. O'Neill, hello.
Hello. I think we've talked about this. I really like this one. It gives me a lot of thinking about the nature of how information is stored. And you've talked a lot about spatial. I'm still struggling with the sense of spatial as a broader concept, because to me, spatial contains a significant amount of information that has to do with the position of things relative to each other in space, their distances, their relative sizes. Like, there's a lot of information spatially that may or may not be necessary to make a lot of decisions that happen in certain kinds of architecture. So, and I think the example of the situatedness, the building that near Holland is really interesting, because they could have said we need our offices to be next to the garage, and we really want to make sure that the offices are within range of the garage, but that the garage can still do its job really well. And that you could make the argument that was a situated assertion, right, without drawing a picture at all. And so to me, like one of the challenges when I think about spatiality is it demands a lot of information that may or may not be necessary to do the next thing, the next kind of analysis, right? So when you talked about situations or spatial relationships, can you make a propositional assertion about a spatial relationship, or are you actually talking about, here is a picture of two things next to each other at these points in times, and this is above the other thing, and they have this relative shape to each other? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out what you mean by that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm tracking
Here's why it matters.
tightly. Yeah.
Here's why it matters. You basically.
And I think I hit the cut of your jib. Yeah.
Well, because you did an analysis of tickets and theater events using an object model, right? An object model is mathematically are vertices and associations. The spatial relationship is, the spatiality of that is like, I can use a ticket, like I'm holding this ticket and I could go to one of three different places. So there are ways to describe situatedness that don't have any spatiality in them, I guess.
Yes.
Right.
Oh,
that's what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yes, so, and that's maybe again, I don't have an answer, but it seems like what's relevant to what you just broke through to there is the dualistic thing about sense making and place making,
Mm,
that there is a situatedness of these business concepts that doesn't have an expression in XYZ coordinate world.
right.
And when we're saying space, what are we saying? Are we saying XYZ coordinate land? Are we saying in the object model in the movie theater problem, the showtime in the diagram, right? There's an uppy downiness. And the fact that the showtime was really what was the crux of the matter, that was positioned in the diagram below ticket as like an attribute of the ticket. And then it's like, oh no, it isn't way down there as an attribute of the ticket. We could make these be synonymous, and they are synonymous, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
there was a situating of the concepts in the
Yes.
GD diagram.
Well, yeah,
That
like
was
Dan
a
Brown
spa-
talks about
that was a
wireframes.
spatial arrangement thing that we were doing to see the architecture.
Yes.
And at the
And
same time, they were making a building
yeah,
with a lawn and a listening room and a movie theater that diagram thing had no relationship to and a direct relationship to at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, thanks for, I like to bring it up because it's something I think about a lot, but I think here's what I would say. I think
Well, that's why
that,
we lose architects, Daniel.
yeah,
When we say information architecture and places made of information and conceptual space, just, their faces, man, it really depresses me. I've tried to talk with architects about this stuff. They're like, no, what you do doesn't have nothing to do with what we do. I think Richard might be the only one who thinks it's the same thing.
I like the model.
Thank you.
Cool. And this is unfortunately our last question because we've gone a little over time. But
Yep.
if you do have any questions, and I see there are a lot of questions coming in, even in the Q&A message chat. So if you do have any questions, you can go to the
Type
link.
them in on the webpage.
Yep. Yeah.
I really want to make this better, so there's no such thing as a dumb question.
Yep.
Well, actually, I want dumb questions. The more basic, the better.
Cool. Okay, for our last question, we have Karen.
This is Ringer City. Love it.
It's
Hey, Karen.
City. Sorry.
Nope. It's all good.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to add to the frame of the opportunity. So we're all experiencing these intense turnovers on our team throughout the US and most of the world. And having lived through my first 2 years as an internal person, this gets harder. This gets so much harder. So as we get new people in the door, like share this framework with them and beg them to help you see these things.
Yeah, what if we were all looking at the same stuff and seeing mostly the same thing, right? Yeah.
Or maybe we're seeing too much of the same thing and those new people can help us see the different cross section.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. I miss you. Next time it'll be in person, I promise.
I miss you too.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for answering all the questions and giving such a great talk. And again, to all the attendees, if you do have any questions, please go to the link that's mentioned here in the screen that you see, which is bit.ly/basic booklet. Other than that, if you are new to AMUX and if you are interested in past presentations that we've done, we have them recorded and they're up on our website at amux.org. Secondly, if you know someone who wants to give us a speech or wants to talk about something, or if you yourself are interested, please reach out to us either via LinkedIn. We also have a Slack workspace, or just message us on Meetup. But other than that, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. We hope that you have a great rest of the day. And thanks once again to Dan, and also for staying back a little extra. Cool.
Thanks, everybody.